Explosion in Odessa. NATO ships in flames. In the early hours of the morning, the port of Levk, near Odessa, became the scene of one of the most devastating attacks of the war in Ukraine. The precision of Russian Garin missiles destroyed several cargo ships loaded with NATO military weaponry, unleashing a series of explosions that shook the bay. This was Russia's response to the intensification of arms supplies to Ukraine from Eastern Europe, especially from Poland and Romania. It was a checkmate. NATO ships burned like never before. In the last night's assault, the port of Levk near Odessa was the stage for one of the most decisive and devastating incursions of the war in Ukraine. Russian forces carried out a direct attack on Ukrainian port infrastructure that supplied the Ukrainian armed forces with vital military supplies, many of which came from NATO allies. The barrage of Garin missiles was only the prelude to a series of strikes that dismantled a crucial piece of Kiev's war logistics, which had become a strategic target since the beginning of the conflict. The night bore witness to a chilling spectacle. Cargo ships, fully loaded with NATO ammunition and equipment, were struck with pinpoint accuracy by Russian missiles. The impact generated enormous flames that lit up the Black Sea as if it were a volcano. According to Russian media and Kremlin intelligence sources, the attack aimed to disrupt supply lines to Ukraine's military machinery. It was no coincidence that the port of Ilyichivsk, an important entry point for NATO shipments from Romania and Poland, was targeted. In recent weeks, the flow of military material had increased exponentially, marking an intensive effort by Ukraine's allies to provide Zelensky's forces with the necessary means to withstand Russian pressure. The Russians left no room for doubt. Their military power in the Black Sea is far from being a minor threat. The attack on Ilyichivsk is part of a series of strategic operations aimed at cutting off the supply routes of weaponry, a goal that military analysts have identified as crucial from the start of the conflict to weaken Ukrainian forces and simultaneously demoralize NATO's coalition. For months, Ukrainian ports had been essential conduits for high-tech equipment, from advanced air defense systems to missiles, drones, and heavy weapons. These carefully transported shipments from Eastern Europe had kept Ukraine's war machine running. In this sense, the attack comes at a critical moment in the war. Political tensions between Ukraine and its Western allies, especially with the United States, were reaching a boiling point. In recent weeks, relations with Washington had been particularly tense, especially after reports of delays in the delivery of certain essential weapon systems. Zelensky found himself increasingly isolated, facing both internal pressure from his armed forces demanding more resources and external pressure from his Western sponsors, who were beginning to question the strategy and direction of the conflict. The Garin missiles, launched from Russian platforms in the Black Sea, were not the only tools used in this attack. Attack drones also joined the offensive, penetrating Ukrainian airspace in the early morning. Witness reports mention massive flashes after the impacts on the cargo ships, some of which contained high-caliber munitions and state-of-the-art equipment provided by NATO. This action, according to Russian military analysts, demonstrates a clear response to NATO members' increasing involvement in the conflict, an involvement reflected in the volume of supplies reaching Black Sea ports. The port infrastructure in Odessa, a critical area for Ukraine's war logistics, is now the focus of a Russian strategy aimed at disrupting supply chains. Ilyichivsk, in particular, had been identified as a nerve center for receiving military material from abroad. The destruction of drone assembly warehouses, gas production stations, and fuel depots adds to a series of attacks that have made Moscow's objective clear: to prevent Ukraine from receiving the weapons and resources needed to continue its fight against Russian forces. This is not an isolated attack, but part of a broader strategy that includes weakening Ukrainian Black Sea ports, which serve as the main arteries for heavy military equipment, fuel, and vital supplies for Ukrainian forces. On the other hand, battlefield sources have also confirmed that this type of Russian aerial offensive is far from improvised. The use of Garin missiles and cutting-edge drones demonstrates the advanced level of electronic warfare that Russian forces have deployed. The precision and destructive power of these missiles, capable of penetrating Ukraine's air defenses, make them a formidable tool for Moscow. which has significantly improved its military capabilities since the start of the conflict. The Ukrainian response, according to reports, was swift but insufficient. Air defense units attempted to intercept several drones before they reached their targets, but their efforts were not enough to prevent significant collateral damage in the port. Witnesses at the attack site described apocalyptic scenes. The area was covered in smoke, and the burning ships seemed to blaze with fury. Ukrainian authorities, in an attempt to mitigate the impact of the strike, quickly cordoned off the area and evacuated those at risk, but the material damage was substantial. This strike not only represents a considerable material loss, but also has far-reaching strategic implications. If Russia continues this tactic of attacking Ukraine's logistical infrastructure, the effects on the operational capabilities of Ukrainian forces could be devastating. The dismantling of supply chains, combined with the internal pressures of war, could push Ukraine into an unsustainable situation in the long run. As NATO ships burned in the waters of the Black Sea, Moscow's message was clear: Ukraine will not continue receiving support without consequences. The war in Ukraine, which has devastated the nation and left deep scars on its people, is becoming a battlefield where each strategic decision has the potential to change the course of the conflict. The NATO ships that burned in Lviv represent not only a blow to Ukraine's military infrastructure, but also a clear warning to Western allies. Their support for Ukraine will become increasingly costly, and Russia will not hesitate to take decisive measures to curb any attempt to prolong the war. In this context, this attack, which could mark a turning point in the conflict, makes it clear: the struggle for control of the Black Sea is much more than a matter of territory. It is a battle for supply lines, for control of trade routes, and ultimately, for the survival of Ukrainian forces in the face of Moscow's relentless pressure. This attack on the NATO supply ships in the Black Sea represents a critical moment in the ongoing war in Ukraine. The destruction of key logistical hubs, the loss of vital military equipment, and the sheer scale of the Russian offensive highlight a strategic shift aimed at crippling Ukraine's ability to sustain its defense. As the flames consumed the cargo vessels, the message from Moscow was clear: continued Western support for Ukraine will not go unanswered. The growing tensions between Kiev and its allies, particularly the United States, further complicate Ukraine's position, raising concerns about its long-term capacity to withstand Russian aggression. If Russia continues to target Ukraine's logistical infrastructure, the war could reach a turning point, forcing Ukraine into a precarious position where sustaining military operations becomes increasingly difficult. The attack also underscores the advanced warfare capabilities of the Russian military, which has demonstrated precision and coordination in executing devastating blows against Ukrainian supply lines. With NATO shipments under direct threat, the broader geopolitical landscape is shifting, creating uncertainty about how the West will respond to Moscow's latest offensive. The battle for control over the Black Sea is not just about territorial dominance. It is a fight for strategic supply routes, economic influence, and ultimately, the survival of Ukraine's resistance against Russian pressure. The war is intensifying, and every action taken now will determine the future of the conflict. Stay informed, subscribe to the channel, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think this attack marks a turning point in the war? Will NATO escalate its involvement, or will Ukraine be left to fend for itself? Hit the like button, share this video, and turn on notifications to stay updated on the latest developments in this high-stakes conflict.